Again, welcome. My name is Michelle Maxwell, and I work with the Clinical Research Subcommittee, who plans the Futures in Neurological Research program. Normally, we're together at the annual meeting, and this year, we're together for a 5-month webinar series, and want to thank you for being with us today. I have the pleasure of introducing our facilitator for today. Dr. Alexander Panteliat is an assistant professor of neurology at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. He is the director of the Johns Hopkins Atypical Parkinsonism Center, the co-director of Johns Hopkins Movement Disorders Fellowship Program, and the co-founder and co-director of the Johns Hopkins Center for Music and Medicine. His research explores music-based rehabilitation of neurodegenerative diseases, diagnosis, and treatment of atypical Parkinsonian disorders. He is an AAN Palatucci Advocacy Leader and Grant recipient, an AAN Emerging Leader, and now a member of the AAN Clinical Research Subcommittee. Dr. Panteliat, please take it from here.
Michelle, thank you for the introduction, and it is my pleasure to host this second monthly talk in our Futures in Neurologic Research program. Our goal today is to focus on successful research strategies and outcomes for medical students, residents, and fellows. And as we saw by the first poll today, it seems like our audience will be benefiting from this. Our learning objectives today are to share important resources about research with junior and future junior investigators, to inspire new and up-and-coming researchers in your careers, and to connect participants with experts in the field, as well as other future colleagues. Our Futures in Neurological Research virtual programs are meant to substitute for the in-person programming, the annual meeting, and our virtual themes have included Getting Your Feet Wet. That's from August last month, with the video and slides available. Today's session, which is focused on scientific writing, and just want to give you a heads up for October, Funding Means Freedom, how to work towards obtaining funding in your research. So as I mentioned, today's webinar concerns scientific writing, and we're lucky to have two wonderful speakers and my colleagues today. So the first talk is called Nuts and Bolts of Scientific Publications. And it is absolutely my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Dr. Oluwole Awosika. He is a junior clinician scientist and assistant professor at the University of Cincinnati College of Medicine in the departments of Neurology and Rehabilitation Medicine. Olu received a double Bachelor of Science degrees in Neuroscience and Physiological Science from UCLA, and had his medical training at the University of Illinois College of Medicine. He completed his adult neurology residency training at Harvard Medical School in the Partners in Neurology, Mass General, and Brigham and Women's Hospital program, and a postdoctoral research fellowship at the National Institutes of Health, as well as a clinical neurorehabilitation fellowship at Georgetown University. Olu serves as an assistant editor of eNeurological Science and is an ad hoc reviewer for several scientific and clinical journals. Let's virtually but heartily welcome Olu.
Thank you all very much for attending, and I hope that you take something from these two talks. We can go to the next slide, please. And so the question is really, why is it important to publish? I always think of this as the 3 S's, which is self, science, and society. And so for self, academic publishing is critical for, as a measure, it's a barometer for productivity. It's needed to be able to prove oneself when applying for grants, applications, and also needed for promotion. Some people who do not publish have a very low chance of being able to sort of survive in the rigorous academic environment. And also with continuous or sustained publications over time, one can easily become a leader or authority in a particular area. And so for science, as many of you have presented at AAN and other scientific conferences, this is important to keep a field alive and continue to grow, and that we'll continue to share knowledge for the scholarship aspect of it. And then this tails it into a society and the importance of advancing medicine through our research and being able to disseminate it widely to the general public. And this, of course, is what a lot of policymakers look at up in the Capitol, as well as where funding goes. Funding decisions are based on the research that we are doing. And next slide. And so what are the types of manuscripts? Case reports and case series. For most people here, based on being residents and are probably accustomed to this, or these are good measures of your scholarly interest, and many programs are looking at this to see, what you're able to do and contribute from this aspect. However, the scientific review and meta-analysis is sort of the next stage. Of the three, this takes the most time to be able to devote, but scientific reviews and meta-analysis allows one to essentially become an authority in an area almost overnight, and because you have to review an extensive amount of literature. The original scientific manuscript, however, is really when we talk about publishing and academic success that many places are looking at. And as you move up on the academic ladder, it's going to be expected that you have more of these original scientific manuscripts. Next. And so just out of curiosity, I made a search term of brain or spinal cord and plasticity to look at how many studies have been published over since 1945, so over the last 60 plus years to see, or 70 plus years to see exactly what the trend is. As you can see that there's a large exponential trend just for this search term alone. Now multiply this by 1,000 of ongoing studies that are currently going on. So definitely people are publishing, and there's, with so much information, I think people are continually trying to keep up and continue to try to bring out their data, whether to support or refute other findings. And so next. So despite this upward trend, there are still an overwhelmingly amount of unpublished data. And just to show that point, a study by Weber et al. And Jamin in 1998 published a study based off of the number of abstracts submitted to the 21st annual meeting of the Society for Academic Emergency Medicine in 1991. There were a total of 492 abstracts, and they monitored to see which of these abstracts actually went on to get published in scientific or journals. And they found that about 45% were published. And so the crux of this study was really to look at the unpublished studies and send a survey to see why they did not publish. So of that survey, they received a total of 223 responses. Next. And only 20% of the people that responded, of the responders, actually submitted a manuscript, and it just turned out that it was not published. What was striking is that 80% did not submit a manuscript, and never submitted their manuscript. And the reason being for is the number one reason was not enough time, or they felt maybe they didn't have a chance of getting accepted. But many reasons listed, but you see the trend. Next. So let's to a poll. What are your hurdles to publishing? A, time. B, not knowing what to write about. C, null results or negative data. Or D, fear or anxiety about the process. So it looks like the majority, it's an issue of time, but I think they're well distributed. Okay, next. So we'll address each topic briefly. And so the time factor. So I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the Stephen Covey's 4 quadrants. The point of it is really to work on time management, and it's broken up into the horizontal axis is about urgency of a particular task, and then the vertical is more of its importance. So in the medical field, most of us spend our time in quadrant 1 and 3. You know, everything seems like urgent and needs to get done. While everything seems important, we know that not everything is really important. So examples of things that are important are maybe, you know, grant deadlines or, you know, patient care. And then quadrant 3, I mean, there are some things where we consider more kind of tasks that has to be done, you know, getting recertified and whatnot. And then quadrant 4 is what we think of where people who are like a typical like couch potato, but you know, we all are guilty sometimes of the guilty pleasure of spending some time in this quadrant. But I wanted to show you quadrant 2, if we tap on next. This really, when we talk about time management and building one future, this is the quadrant that we want to pay particular attention to and require that we spend a considerable amount of time, not all at once, but over time in this section. You think of things such as you know, spending time with family or exercising regularly, and also scientific writing. Next. And so really, to be able to accomplish this, this requires 20 minutes a day of uninterrupted time where you devote to manuscript writing. You choose the time where you're able to kind of think the best, where you're clear-minded. For some people, this is the first thing in the morning. For others, it's in the middle of the day. But I challenge you to set a particular 20 minutes of not do anything, and to be able to really see, just set a timer and see how long 20 minutes is, and you find that you can actually get a lot done. So this is a good first step, is setting aside this time to work on manuscript writing. Second is to create a folder on your desktop that don't put it in documents or somewhere else. Leave it right on your desktop, so that way you won't miss it, and you can always go to it, and it's continually nags at you. And then step 3 is really in writing, is to start easy and then, you know, go to the difficult. And so the methods, because before you actually carry out a study, you need to already have a sound method, or you need to have done the planning beforehand. And so this is pretty much, you know, writing it out so that it's understandable. And it's almost like a recipe, you know, in a way, is that there's not a lot of creativity to method writing. You just kind of do it. And so that's a good first step. And the second is the introduction. This allows you to be able to make a case for why you're pursuing the study. So it should be written more in a story format, and you don't not need to have the results to be able to write your introduction. Actually, you should already have written an introduction before you find out the results. And then when you get your analysis and results, then you can look into now how best to address the discussions and limitations, you know, from the results. And when you have all of that, you can take a step back and then determine a proper abstract and title for the study that best summarizes the whole thing and puts it in a nice package. Next. So B, not knowing what to write about. The best way around this really is just to read. I'll find out more about what particularly interests you, and it's something that kind of builds over time. You can seek the advice of a mentor or advisor, and just whenever you hear like a lecture and something interests you, pursue it further. And then we have a lot of eureka moments, usually and at odd times, whether like, you know, waking up in the middle of the night or running or in the shower. It's important that you have a way of being able to document this, because chances are you're not going to recall later on down the line. So make sure to just jot notes and then pursue those interests. And also, again, have nice scholarly discourse with your colleagues and mentors to kind of see what interests you, and maybe find out where we need to explore further what's known and what's not known in a particular field. Next. And then, of course, the null results, right? The big failure. Everyone wants a happy ending, and no one wants to publish this. But actually, And we know that in literature that there's a real bias for authors, editors, and publishers in publishing positive findings. And there's a problem with this, as we can see with, for example, the autism and vaccines, right? You know, how that kind of misled the field for a long time. So it's important to really have this negative and null results to really be able to give us the truth, because a lot of what is the truth is not seen, it's hidden, just like it's the tip of the iceberg, right? Is what's seen, but it's not, doesn't represent the true magnitude. So it's very important to publish negative results as well. Next. And there are many journals that have clearly expressed the interest in publishing these type of findings. And there are very good journals as well. I listed some here, and there are others as well that have expressed interest in actually having people submit these. And so the key thing here is, in good science lives hope. Pretty much the methodology is usually where the issue is what is the deciding point. And if you have a good methodology, a sound methodology, then surely you're gonna have your manuscript accepted. Next. And lastly is the fear anxiety factor. Just keep in mind that it's kind of a rite of passage in academia. The most senior scientists, the most published, have been through the same process. And so it's really taking one step at a time, and knowing that you don't have to, it doesn't have to be perfect. There are people who have written, 20, 30 revisions before they get to the one that they're actually gonna send out to reviewers. And then when you get to reviewers have more revisions. But rest assured though that the final version is always better. And then just one key thing is that we talked about methods, introduction, and results. It's very key to spend a lot of time on discussion and limitations. The best way to tease this out are through presentations, and really listen to the questions people have, and also and your responses. And it's important to document this, because reviewers will see this and actually give you credit for being able to be upfront and being able to address it. And that actually makes it easier, your chances of first-time acceptance a lot easier. But again, it's a process, and you just have to take it one step at a time. Next. And so just briefly, some quick tips is about writing. Is to save you time. Is to take charge. I know many people are waiting for other residents to maybe write about a case report or an interesting case. Just take control of it and start writing, and people will actually join you towards the latter end. So just kind of take control of it, map it out, and go for it. And then also check out the journal website to see whether what you want to submit, it actually fits the scope and also fits the format of the journal. And also it's important to look at the duration of how long it takes from submission to acceptance. And you can see that right by most abstracts in the articles. And so typically 6 months is what you would expect. Anything longer than that, you want to really consider whether you actually want to submit your article to this particular journal. But typically that's around what the average for a good turnaround time from submission to acceptance is. And then in terms of writing a note of inquiry before you actually submit your manuscript to the chief editor, to get their interest. And this helps in two ways. One, you get an immediate yes or no before going through all the work of submitting. And then also when they see that you submit, it's more likely that you're gonna have pay attention to your submission and get it out a lot sooner. And then also using a central source, such as a cloud, such as Box or a Microsoft Teams, is a good way to kind of set a deadline of when you want a manuscript reviewed by. And so instead of sending it out to multiple people and then collating it, you can all just do it all at once through a central source. Next. And then avoid silly errors. We all make it, but it's important that what you're submitting is as perfect as possible. The best way to do that is really, using apps like Grammarly and just checking, and then also reading aloud. Sometimes our brain skips over errors, and so we have to just read it out and have others read it and get their feedback. I want to really point out that figures and tables are very important. These should be standalone documents that don't even need text. You should be able to look at a figure and tell exactly what's going on, at least have an idea, and same as the tables. And also it's important that what you're writing in the results is congruent with what is actually on the figure and table. So it needs to be its own standalone. And then lastly, think like a reviewer. Reviewers are kind of busy, just like you and I, and really they are tired. So make it easy for them, when they're reading. Use more active type language than passive. Use as commas as frequently as possible, and also vary your sentences as well to make it more exciting to read. And then also sometimes just keeping it simple, clear, and precise goes a long way. And then avoid using similar kind of terms, like different ones, like it confuses a lot of readers. And so just keep it, use one word and keep it that way. And then also be respectful and professional when you get your reviewer comments back. So I'll hand that over to Dr. Uc.
Thank you so much, Dr. Awosika. Next, we will have Dr. Ergun Uc present on the topic of manuscript review. Dr. Uc is a professor in the Department of Neurology at the Carver College of Medicine, the University of Iowa, and is the director of the Movement Disorders Division of the Parkinson's Disease Center of Excellence there, which is designated by the Parkinson Foundation. He also has a joint appointment as a staff neurologist at the Veterans Affairs Hospital. He has been Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Iowa City. He's been certified by the American Board of Neurology and Psychiatry. He had graduated from the Istanbul Faculty of Medicine at the Istanbul University in Turkey and completed his neurology residency and movement disorders fellowship at the University of Iowa. Dr. Uc is involved in all aspects of the care of Parkinson's disease patients, including deep brain stimulation, and his research focuses on cognition, driving, and physical exercise in Parkinson's disease. As a member of the Parkinson Study Group, he has participated in multi-center clinical trials and experimental drugs and has received research support from the National Institutes of Health, Department of Veterans Affairs, the Department of Defense, as well as the American Parkinson's Disease Association, the Parkinson Study Group, the Parkinson's Disease Foundation, and the Michael J. Fox Foundation. He's served as the chair of the Behavior Cognition Working Group of the Parkinson Study Group, and he's published widely and lectured nationally and internationally on Parkinson's disease. He is currently an associate editor for the journal Parkinsonism and Related Disorders. Let's welcome Dr. Uc.
Thank you, Dr. Panteliat, and Dr. Awosika, thank you very much for your great lecture and an introduction to what I will be talking about. Next slide, please. And next. So these are the poll questions for the audience. Next slide, please. So I see that 73% has written papers, 69% first author, and a quarter of the attendees have been the corresponding author, and about 40% have reviewed papers, so that's great. So next slide, please. So what's peer review? So peer review is really intended to advance science by making sure that high quality, original, and valid papers are published, and poor quality articles and fraudulent work is filtered out. So this is not really the most perfect strategy, perhaps, because we are all human beings and have biases. However, no better strategy has yet emerged. It's like Churchill's quote on democracy. Democracy is the worst form of governance except all the other systems of government that have been tried before. So, next slide, please. And I like this quote because it really puts peer review in very plain terms. Is the paper you are reviewing new? Is it true? And does anybody care about the results? So you have to answer these three questions for an effective peer review. Next slide, please. So there are different models of peer review. Especially during this coronavirus pandemic, we have seen lots of preprints. So these are papers that are made public before they are peer reviewed, and they have really changed our lives sometimes with coronavirus pandemic. And we also have seen that some of them did not turn out to be true later. So then the most common is pre-publication, and then post-publication are like editorials. So next slide, please. So here, what I'm circling is the most common type of review we conduct. So it's typically before publication, it's single blind. So the authors typically don't know who the reviewers are, but the reviewers know who the authors are. It's mediated by the journals or the editors, and it's all facilitated by the journal. Whereas in other more newer models, there is interaction between editors or even with the authors. Next slide, please. So how does peer review process work, especially for the model which I just mentioned before? So an author submits an article. The article is assessed by an editor. So like many articles arrive on the editor-in-chief's desk, and they are, a good number of them are rejected by the editor. And then the editor-in-chief refers them to one of the associate editors depending on their area of expertise. And the associate editor, again, editorially rejects a good number of articles and then sends the rest to the reviewers. So here we have to realize that this is really a labor of love. So typically not reimbursed time or little reimbursement for editors, and no reimbursement for reviewers. But it's certainly an honor to do so, and this is how we advance our field. But we have to realize, as Dr. Awosika said, that we do it on top of all the other things we are doing, seeing patients, doing our research, administration, being with our family, and we do it on our time. So therefore, as an associate editor, I send papers to experts. Typically, I have to send it to 6, 7 people to get 2 people, 3 people to agree. Sometimes it has to be more. And after the reviews are come back, they're assessed by me, and I make recommendations to the editor, and depending on that, the paper gets a decision. And as you see, there is a cycle that may repeat several times that results in the rejection of paper or acceptance and publication of the paper. Next slide, please. So if you get an invitation to review, you have to decide on several things. So can I meet the deadline? Because the authors are eager for their work to be published, and the editor and the associate editor want the paper out of their inbox. So, and then, am I truly an expert on this? And do I know the limitations of myself? And then, do I have any grudge against any of the authors? Will I be a neutral reviewer? This is very important. And if you have concerns in any of these, it's best to decline and recommend a suitably qualified colleague. Next slide, please. So we have, again, the reviewers, the editors really like when the reviewers respond quickly. And of course, the reviewers shouldn't share the confidential work. They have to stay within the scope and don't try to rewrite the paper. And always be constructive. Treat people as you want to be treated, and see it as a community work to improve science. Allocate enough time, and you have to be consistent in your comments, structured, and divide into major, minor issues, and make sure that your confidential comments to the editor match in tone what you are telling the authors. And we should focus on the research, not on the person or the language. And look at the conclusion first sometimes so that you can assess the novelty, because novelty is very important. And of course, check robustness of facts and give credit where it's due. Next slide, please. So these should guide our reviews. So the introduction. So when you look at the introduction, what are the elements of introduction? So it has to set out the argument well and have a quick, efficient summary of the previous research and highlight the gap and establish the originality. Why are you doing the work and did the work and publishing the article? And state aims clearly. So the reviewer should not get the impression that you have been on a fishing expedition. So you have to have clear hypotheses and aims to write a successful paper. Next slide, please. Now, materials and methods are very important. So the idea here is if somebody else wants to do the same research, they should be able to repeat and replicate what you have done with the method section of your work. This is so important because statistics show there are huge problems with reproducibility of published papers. And if a paper cannot be reproduced, the results cannot be reproduced, then we cannot rely on them as much. And this can affect advancement of science and also at the end, patient care. So again, and also the research has to be robust with appropriate sample sizes and methods, and best practices have to be followed, both in subject protection, ethical standards in terms of writing the paper, and also standard guidelines should be followed in writing different types of papers, such as clinical trials. So when you write the paper, you have to follow these guidelines and answer to each of these individual items in the consort statement, for example. Next slide, please. The results. So the results have to be really clear and make sure how the statistics, statistical analysis show if they are significant or not. And very important, you should not draw any conclusions in this section. And also, one should use tables and figures to improve the understandability, the readability of the manuscript. And it's ideal if these figures and tables could stand alone for a quick understanding of the results. And they should be clear, concise, and accurately reflect the findings of the text. As a reviewer, if you are concerned about the statistics, sometimes there are many outcomes measured, then you should alert the editor to get a statistical review. You know, you are the subject matter expert, but you may not be a statistics expert. So therefore, it's very important to get a statistical review in some papers. Next slide, please. Discussion is again next important. So here, the author should give a brief summary and explanation of the findings, but it should not be like a repeat of the results section. And then they should mention the study limitations, because there is nothing worse than the reviewer telling you what your limitations are. So you have to be upfront and tell them, and then address the limitations and that how they affected the importance, the conclusions of the paper. Now, one should be honest in interpreting the results, and also should not go beyond what the results can explain. So sometimes papers go into very physiological explanations based on clinical outcomes and mention fMRI papers and pathology papers and so forth, and they do not rely on their own findings. So you should not physiologize your results and mainly interpret your results. And also, you should have plausible alternative explanation for your results and not have just one way of thinking. And then state how these results can be applied in patient care or other applied field, and what the future directions for research could be. And many papers also have a small conclusions section, either as the last paragraph or two, or as a separate section. Here, you tell, the authors have to tell the bottom line. So, did they achieve their aims? And this particular section needs to be evidence-based. It's very important, and if they overstate their findings, it needs to be rewritten. Next slide, please. And then you write your report. So first, give positive feedback, but if you are going to reject, don't go overboard on that. And briefly summarize to the editor what the paper is about and what the findings are. Then put it into the context of the existing literature and indicate in that context if the work is novel or it's just confirming previous work. And confirmation is also important because replication is important in science. And then indicate its strengths, and then start talking about the flaws and weaknesses if there are any. Next slide, please. So next, you should itemize the major issues if there are. And very important, find out if similar work has been published before and if the authors have not acknowledged that. And if the authors are challenging current thinking, they really have to cite previous relevant work and address how their results are different and justify their different thinking. Indicate the major revisions, make sure that the figures and tables are clear, and be cognizant about, be alert about ethical issues if they are concerned about plagiarism, and if you have such concerns, make sure you indicate them in confidential comments to the editor. And next slide, please. So minor issues, don't act like a copy editor, and just be constructive. If there are too many errors, you can alert the editor that it has to be reviewed for language. Next slide, please. And at the end, you either accept the paper or recommend major or minor revisions. And if you reject, your feedback has to be constructive to improve the research. And again, keep the focus on the research and not the author. And you should avoid making critical confidential comments to the editor, which you have not mentioned to the authors. So there has to be some congruence, but again, peer review is really very important to advance science and help each other. So it really takes a village, a community to advance our fields. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Uc. Thank you to both of our excellent speakers. At this point, we will begin the Q&A section. I want to remind you to type your questions in the Q&A field, not the Zoom webinar chat, but the Q&A field. And also, if there are questions that others have typed that you like, please designate them with a thumbs up, because that will move them up in the queue. Also, just a quick reminder, at the end of the Q&A, there will be a brief survey, and we ask that you kindly fill it out before you go. So at this point, there is one question in the Q&A chat, and I would like to have both Dr. Awosika and Dr. Uc address it. It is rather a broad question, and it comes from Dr. Zitzer-Koren. It says, I'm a clinician, and only in the last 2-3 years I've begun to become interested in research. It's striking for me how inefficient the research process is, even after you have data, It seems you spend most of your time either asking for a grant or reading other papers to write the discussion of your own paper. It seems that by the time a paper is actually published, the information in it is at least a couple of years old. How can we make this process more efficient?
I guess I'll take a stab at it. I mean, I definitely agree. It's frustrating, but I think Dr. Uc made an important point in that, you know, the process of really finding reviewers. Sometimes you really have to just send out, and there are not enough people. A lot of people, you know, say that they don't have time, and so I think that process is really long in itself. And you need usually a minimum of 2 reviewers, and so being able to get that sometimes just it goes, you know, along. I think. So it's an issue. I think having more people volunteer to review, I think is important. And definitely don't review if you don't have time to, you know, but I think the more people volunteer, the better. And then also I think there are some pre-publishing opportunities as well, like where you can actually send out your data and to the community and they can look at it. Obviously you have to be careful that most of that is not peer reviewed, but that's another way to disseminate your information out there, at least for the community to see.
Yeah, so I guess the issue can be looked into, the question can be reviewed into different perspectives. So one is, I think the questioner asked that there needs to be so much time spent reading other papers and writing your discussion, but that's the nature of the beast. You know, we have to certainly understand the literature. So the idea is not to beef up our CV. The idea is really to advance science, and which will eventually make our lives better and make the patient care better. So therefore, we just have to, and we don't do research for doing research. You know, we do it for to improve the mankind in a way in final analysis. So in that sense, I think all the work that goes into reading past papers and thinking about is not for naught. It's really extremely important. So this way, after reading those, you can also identify what the gaps are in the literature, and so that you can also get new ideas, and your research, your paper will be much stronger. So, and I think this inefficiency is built in to have more reliable results. Because like in the preprint stuff, remember hydroxychloroquine and the papers that came out in the pandemic. So that really, who knows how those papers affected lives of coronavirus, COVID-19 patients due to side effects or whatever. So therefore, because of the urgency of the situation, peer review was sacrificed to some degree, and I think it had negative consequences but it was like a war situation. So hindsight is 2020. The other one, Dr. Awosika has addressed the inefficiency of the review procedure. I think it really needs to undergo some sort of reform, because we are still operating with the criteria of the late 19th century and mid 20th century to some degree with help of electronic communication. And it's a little bit of a black box, you know, what exactly goes on in the review process. So the newer models, which unfortunately I am not very familiar with, are promising. So the more community work we have in advancing a paper, and the more we share our findings rather than using it for just personal or institutional advancement, the better it will be. So, but it's a real philosophical question, and it affects all aspects of the society, not just this. I mean, the same can be applied for economical systems.
Thank you both very much. Next question. We might not agree with some of the comments provided by reviewers, but in my experience, we need to accommodate all comments to get an acceptance. As an editor, this is a question for Dr. Uc, do you also read the full response letter, or do you just look at the reviewer's final recommendations?
Oh, I certainly read the full response letter. So I may sometimes not agree with a reviewer, and I may provide a review myself. I send it to others, so it prolongs. But and it's certainly the right thing to do. You don't need to kowtow out to reviewers. Of course, you need to respect them, but you don't need to, as I said, sacrifice scientific integrity. So you just say it as it is, and if you are not happy with it, you can appeal the decisions. It happens rarely. So I think we just have to be open, fair, and transparent. Really, just be principled.
Thank you very much. Question for Dr. Awosika. What are your suggestions on writing successful case reports?
I think the most successful case reports, really is one that is bringing something novel. It's okay if it's been published once. When it starts becoming like 2 or 3 times or so, then it then starts to bring down its significance. But I think the biggest flaw in preparing patient for a case report is that not enough of the methodology, or like not enough of the testing is done. And as a result, a lot of reviewers are going to have questions. How do you know it's not this? How do you know it's not that? And so I think before you can make a claim, you have to make sure that, one's done their homework. And so I think presenting the case to, as a part of grand rounds or locally, I think is helpful. And then you can get a lot of feedback that way. And then if possible, be able to get the data. If not, you can include it in the conclusions and why you did it, and why you still suggest that, the whatever diagnosis you're claiming it is. And then also, I think having something that you're contributing other than just the text, whether it's a nice image or sometimes like some physiology, something that really stands out, I think helps. So even if something's been published before in the past, those are usually lacking some of this physiology and, and imaging. And so I think that's something that that you can add and you can benefit from. So again, really, when you find a nice case, consult with it, see what the excitement is, and then you're going to go from there.
Could I also add something? So I think so case reports should not be looked down upon. So because they can be very important, sometimes it can change the thinking in the whole field. So therefore, when you write the case report, think how it can change the thinking on a particular disease or a process, how to approach the diagnosis. So you should see it as a hypothesis generating spark. And if you see it that way, this case report will also be cited by others and will really advance the field. And I also agree with all things Dr. Awosika said, but also keep that, how does this case report advance the thinking, the care of patients?
Thank you very much. Question for Dr. Uc. What are your thoughts on authors providing suggested reviewers? It seems there may be some evidence that if suggested reviewers are provided, the likelihood of success in publication is actually lower.
Well, I actually sometimes ask the reviewers myself, the authors myself, so there may be, so the particular journal I'm working with, it doesn't directly ask the authors for reviewers, but some journals do, like Neurology. So, and sometimes I have difficulty finding reviewers, and it could be a very esoteric field. And then I directly ask the corresponding author who they recommend. I tell them, please make sure you choose people without significant conflict of interest with you. And that actually puts a little bit more onus on the author to come up with names that are not obvious supporters. So, and they know the field better. And these days, when you, as an editor, when you look at when you use the software provided by the journal, you can see who published with who. Of course, you can do a PubMed search yourself. So obviously, if they have published with the same reviewers over and over, it would be a negative. So you can weed out some. So I'm not against the authors providing reviewers at all. I actually like it, but not all journals automatically ask for it.
Thank you. Now, the next question, again, if both of you could take a stab at addressing, is a little bit farther afield, but we could bring it back with an emphasis on publication. It says, I'm a physician who is currently working as a postdoctoral research fellow who's doing clinical and epidemiological research before applying for neurology residency. I find data analysis and interpretation very intimidating. Despite having biostatisticians working along with us, I often find myself lost as to which statistical tests to use and how to organize and interpret my data. As someone without formal training in research, how does one go about learning the technical research skills as pertains to getting successfully published?
I think with biostatistics, while many of us learn it and pick it up over time, I think still most reviewers still want to have more confidence when we know that like a biostatistician has been involved in one way or another to make sure that you're using the best methodology. And definitely for everyone, this really interpretation and the results and all that and the limitations, that can be very nerve-wracking, and we don't want to see it, right? Because we're obviously won't be pursuing a particular study if we didn't think that, if we thought we're going to get a different result. And so sometimes that could be intimidating, but I tell you, it'll save a lot of time if you just address it, get it out there. This applies to grants as well. Like once you know there's a flaw or there's something, just bring it out, be transparent with it. And what matters most is your explanation. And so sometimes it takes, you don't know the explanation like right away, but kind of let it marinate, and you'll come up with something that will be good, that will be, I think, feasible, that would make your chance of acceptance a lot better.
Thank you.
Well, statistics is very important. The devil is in the details, and so I actually went through a similar path. So I have not had any formal research training myself. I did a clinical fellowship, but during the fellowship, I took classes from public health and epidemiology to learn biostatistics. And I didn't become an expert, but I got a conversing knowledge. And whenever I write a paper, I always get the reduced data set, from the biostatistician. And I have a copy of SPSS myself. I am not that good in SAS, but I have a copy of SPSS. So I try to reproduce what the biostatistician has done, because if I don't understand the statistics, if I don't understand how the tables are built, then I don't know what I have done. And then I cannot really defend my research in writing or verbally. So therefore, I think one should invest time to learn. Without learning statistics, you cannot do research, really. I mean, you can, I guess, but you would not have the foundation to understand what you are doing. So I think anybody who wants to be researcher, clinical or basic, has to have some understanding of statistics. It may not be that you do it all by yourself, but you have to have a conversational knowledge, period.
And I'll just quickly add that sometimes SAS and SPSS might be intimidating for people. That's what statisticians use. But I think something better than Excel, but in between that would be Prism is a good one called GraphPad, which is very user-friendly and a good way to kind of learn the statistics, and it walks you through it.
Thank you both. Fantastic. And I couldn't agree more with your feedback. The last question we have right now is, I'm a 4th-year neurology resident accepted to a stroke fellowship program. Congratulations. I'm interested in research, in a research-based career, but don't feel well-trained in research. I'm planning to do a 2nd-year research fellowship, but what other things can be done to get ready?
So as I said, and also many colleagues I know who have gone on to do successful research careers, they have taken classes, even have done masters in public health and epidemiology. So I recommend, again, investing time in this, either formally or at least informally, taking courses. So especially in the field you are going into, if you are doing more clinical work, it's very, very important to understand epidemiology, statistics.
Full disclosure for illustration, I am currently enrolled in an advanced biostatistics class at our School of Public Health here at Hopkins. So I could always learn more. There's no question about it. If I may, since there are currently no open questions, I had a few hopefully helpful questions. So for Dr. Awosika, do you have any favorite resources that you can recommend to our listeners that pertain to writing more, writing efficiently?
Yeah, so there are 4 that I go through, but Write It Up, I think, is very comprehensive. It's a relatively short read. It's by Paul J. Silva, PhD, and pretty affordable. And I think that's a good resource. One that I also feel is very comprehensive, it's actually called Writing for Biomedical Publications. If you type in like NIH and then Writing for Biomedical Publications by Morrison, it'll pop up. And I think it's a very good kind of compendium to have. It's not supposed to read from front to back, but you can reference particular sections at a time. And then lastly, there's one called Writing Your Journal Article in 12 Weeks. And so I thought that the best part of this is actually in the responding part to responding to reviewers. I think it gives examples for almost like different types of instances. And I think it's a good way to be professional and also be, sound, put it in a coherent way that, when reviewers see it, they will actually be impressed. That's
fantastic. Thank you so much for that. Dr. Uc?
So what I would recommend is, in addition to formal sources, so as I said, I didn't have formal research training, but I have been able to write grants and get grants, write papers, etc. So one thing is, so like you can get from your mentors their successful grants and papers and try to understand them in all details, so read it line by line, and also find seminal papers in the literature, published like in New England Journal or similar resources, and those that have really guided the practice and they have been cited very much. Then understand, and hopefully they are close to your field, then read these papers over and over and over and over, and then try to use what you learned in your own writings. So I'm not saying that you should copy, but feel those papers inside you, then you will be able to publish, create similar high quality work.
Well, thank you. Last quick question for Dr. Uc. Is there anything that you could highlight that you have learned from your experience as a reviewer and editor that you've applied to your own writing that's helped you?
Well, of course, so the more you reviews you do, the more review results you see, the more perspectives you get, and you start thinking deeper. So like with anything else, it makes you more refined. So it's kind of a general answer, but it certainly helped me. And also being a reviewer and being an editor, so you kind of keep your pulse on the field. Of course, you should not be sharing and you should be ethical, but still you understand what is important, what is interesting, found as interesting by others, by your peers, and it helps your thinking. So it's important to be active in these types of activities.
Well, thank you both very much for what is a wonderful session. Do we have time quickly for one more question? I guess I'll be optimistic. So one more question. I'm a recent medical graduate and have been trying to work in a review article. While working on a review article, how do you suggest we go about writing the article after reading numerous articles related to the subject? I find myself being lost as to where to begin. Is there a way to be more organized and efficient as I'm reading these articles? Please, last question.
Yeah, let the purpose of writing the review article guide you. I think that would help you with knowing how to organize. And I think with a review article, the most thorough ones mention both sides, even if there's conflicting, and you bring that up. I think people will appreciate that instead of taking one side. But clearly, though, in an introduction, make it clear kind of why this review is being done, what the need is, and then, you know, be transparent.
So if I can say, being able to use some reference management programs is extremely important. So initially I started with reference manager, and these days EndNote or similar programs. So if you are an effective user of these programs, then instead of each time going back to PubMed, you can have a very effective ways of classifying the information and querying for different aspects. And so you can quickly look at the abstracts and then go to the URLs to look at the papers. So I think so being an effective user of reference management programs helps you a lot in writing review papers. And of course, there have been review papers in the past on the same subject many times. So find highly quoted ones and see how they were written and see how you can advance it. I'm not asking you to copy, but use it as an inspiration, as a guide, so that you don't reinvent the wheel.
And I'll just quickly add to that, your methodology, again, is important for reviews, like how you did it, how many people actually, were there 2 people, for example, like looking for the articles? Are you sure you have all the articles? So you want to make sure that you address those, like you have to know where your source is coming from and clearly state it.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree. So there are different types of reviews. There are systematic reviews, there are meta-analysis, and then more plain reviews. So, and then if you claim that you are doing a systematic review or meta-analysis, then you have different ways to follow, as Dr. Awosika said.
Thank you both to our wonderful speakers. I want to remind all the attendees to please fill out the evaluation survey, just 3 questions. And we look forward to welcoming most of you at the next session on October 22nd regarding funding, how it means freedom. Thank you all very much for attending.